Burkina Faso has cut diplomatic ties with France, marking a dramatic break with the colonial ruler. The military junta led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré accused Paris of repeatedly acting against the country's interest, deepening its shift away from Western allies.
Le gouvernement du Burkina Faso
The government of Burkina Faso informs national and international public opinion that it has decided to break off its diplomatic relations with the French Republic with effect from today, 26th of June 2026.
Cette décision fait suite.
The decision follows an in-depth assessment of the current state of bilateral relations between Burkina Faso and France.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa. Burkina Faso cuts ties with France. The Parliament of EU threatens AES. World Cup coverage. The ongoing protests and discussions around Afrophobia in South Africa, and much more. Before we get into today's stories, we like to start with introductions. I'll turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself. You're on mute. Oh, not on mute. It's just the audio. Okay, so that is the Gloria Ao. She is the founder of Diaspora Station, and her handle is there on screen. We'll give her a chance to work out the audio. It is the microphone that was not on. So I think she's working to get that fixed and worked out. I'm Joe Hatagwa. I am the founder of Authentic African Media. We help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. And we also do weekly live streams where we talk about the news of the day around the continent, and as well as in Ghana and Sierra Leone, specifically on Mondays, every other Monday and every other Sunday, respectively. It sounds like we have Gloria back. Do you want to complete your intro? Oh, well, we thought we had her back. We don't have her back as of.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
I want the microphone for it's far more professional, but I don't know, for some reason I always have issues, or I often have issues. But anyway, thanks for the intro. I think that was sufficient. Thank you, Joe. Good to be back.
No problem. Glad to have you back. So, as you saw in the earlier video, Burkina Faso has cut diplomatic ties with France, marking a dramatic break with its former colonial ruler. Ibrahim Traoré accused France of repeatedly acting against the country's interests, deepening its shift away from Western allies. I will say also, African Stream. Sovereign Media also did a quick video on this, so I want to shout out the Sovereign Media folks who are supporters of both of our channels, and we are supporters of all the work and the research that they do. On the 26th, and here's what they write: on the 22nd of June 2026, Burkina Faso summoned the European Union's ambassador to the country following the European Parliament's interference in the West African country. The action is in response to the 17th of June 2026 European Parliament session, during which members of parliament from all over the EU denounced Burkina Faso's leadership and proposed various ways to intervene. The session led with the passing of resolutions the following day. The resolution stated that Parliament calls on Burkinabe authorities, which have dissolved and suspended civil society organizations, to uphold freedom of association, assembly, and expression in the country. The MEPs also note that press freedoms are severely endangered and call for restrictions on media to be lifted and journalists to be allowed to work freely and safely. This is what the EU mentioned to the AES, specifically Burkina Faso. However, and this is according to Sovereign Media, Western countries, including those in the EU, the US, and the UK, have increasingly cracked down on dissenting voices opposing their global hegemony. So what Sovereign Media is saying here is it's hypocritical for the AE to say that Burkina Faso is cracking down on dissent and don't have journalistic voices, when in fact, according to Sovereign Media, the US, UK, and the EU have been doing that exact action. So the Sovereign Media goes on to say, this is the second time this year that the European Parliament has threatened a member of the Pan-African Alliance of Sahelian States, the AES. On the 12th of March, 2026, that same parliament passed a resolution against Niger, calling for the release of President Mohamed Bazoum, alleging the country is repressing journalists and political organizations and demanding elections. So since 2012, following naval destabilization of Libya, the Sahel region has been under attack by jihadist groups and organizations that AES leaders, as well as Radio Television Luxembourg, RTL, have stated are backed by France. That is what they had claimed. So due to their ongoing fight to protect their territorial integrity, these states have been unable to hold elections. Nevertheless, they have made tremendous strides in regaining control of their natural resources, investing in industry and infrastructure, and developing or improving social services for their population. So that is the AES take, and we are going to play a video from them that depicts exactly this. So we'll have some commentary on the other side. Sorry.
European Parliament threatened the government of Burkina Faso as parliament members from all over the European Union denounced the leadership of the West African country's Progressive People's Revolution.
Le Burkina Faso, ce pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest, illustre aujourd'hui l'échec dramatique de la junte militaire au pouvoir depuis le coup d'État de 2022. En 4 ans, le pays s'est progressivement isolé de la communauté internationale, a été suspendu de plusieurs organisations régionales et internationales, tandis que les libertés fondamentales y sont méthodiquement réduites.
One of the primary complaints is that Burkina Faso lacks freedom of expression. But do Western countries have freedom of expression? In 2024, then U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused African Stream and Red Media of giving a voice to Kremlin propagandists, a claim they failed to substantiate. Their accounts were then removed from nearly all social media platforms, forcing them to shut down. The founder of Red Media, Hussein Dogru, was sanctioned by the European Union without trial. Meanwhile, in the French-speaking world, Pan-African activist and media personality Nathalie Yam was also sanctioned by the European Union, and France froze the assets of Pan-African activist Franklin Nyamsi. Grassroots Pan-African leader Kemi Seba was stripped of his French citizenship despite being born in France. In the UK, journalist Richard Medhurst was detained and placed under investigation under Section 12 of the Terrorist Act 2000 for disagreeing with British foreign policy in the Middle East before the case was dropped. In the US, members of the African People's Socialist Party were convicted for acting as agents of the Russian government, despite the fact that their political views are almost entirely focused on combating racism and imperialism in Africa and the African diaspora. In 2020, the United States seized 27 domains from Iran. This is not just taking them off of social media. The US removed another country's websites from the World Wide Web. What all of these cases have in common is that they represent platforms or voices that disagree with US and European foreign policy, denounce imperialism, and were then systematically silenced. So how can the EU worry about lack of freedom of speech in Burkina Faso?
All over the world, where we see that the regime is oppressing the own people instead of serving the own people, we have to also address the people with our solidarity from European side, because the values we represent are not only for Europe, they are universal, they are for everybody, they are about human dignity and individual freedom, and this is something everybody deserves.
This part says so much. Have you ever noticed that despite the fact that African countries might have different cultures, laws, norms, and values, they rarely campaign or fight to impose their views on Europe or the West? Yet, at the same time, Europe has an obsession with universalizing its values. Another important term Lucas Mandel used is individual freedom. The Western liberal values, such as individualism, are often seen on the African continent as deeply hypocritical, when considering that many African societies are historically collectivist, and the well-being of the collective in Africa is consistently violated by these same Western governments.
Now that is Inem Richardson reading that news story, and I think it's really important to shout her out because she was a former member of the This Week in Africa team. And now she's working with Sovereign Media. So also she is a reporter in Burkina Faso, and her voice has not been silenced. So now there was a couple of things there. One, Burkina Faso cutting ties or diplomatic ties with France, and then two, the EU making threats and also requiring changes to the AES as well. Any thoughts on either of the two stories?
Shout out to Inem. Shout out to Sovereign Media. That was a really good one. So a couple of things I want to touch on. Obviously, we can't overflog what France has done in Africa enough, specifically the AES, as it relates to this particular conversation. And we know what they've done, the whole Francophone in Africa, France Afrique, ensuring that the 14 monetary systems in Africa were tied to them, taking uranium from the continent for a fraction of the cost to power France. And then it's not reflecting in the lives of the people in Africa from who they take the resources. So we've talked about France so much, and I want to step away from France now and just focus on the EU. Wow, that man actually used the word dignity. You're talking about the dignity of Africans. If you go down history, as we've seen, the times we've gone through the history of Africa, whenever the conversation around dignity of the people, I talk about, even just last week, I still use the word dignity. Whenever we make reference to the dignity of Africa and Africans, or the lack of the dignity, somehow, for some reason, there's always, more often than not, you have Western interference somewhere in the background. You're concerned about the dignity of Africa, but are you selecting whose dignity you're concerned about? Because surely you have allies on the continent. We know them. We know your friends on the continent. They literally clamp down on freedom of speech. Joe can list countries that have issues with people speaking out against injustice. I can name several, but because they're your allies, you have no issue with them when they're doing their own suppression of freedom of speech. These are supposed to be your people, but you don't have enough energy to focus on them, but you want to focus on the AES. You see, we've gone by the democracy that's been defined by the West for so long. And the truth is, and Joe and I have this conversation all the time, the more you learn about the continent, the more you realize, whoa, everything I thought I knew, I'm having to unlearn. The West throughout history has taught the world which countries are good and which countries are bad in a way to basically position themselves as this superior region of the world. They put themselves out there as the ones who truly look out for all of mankind. But we know what they have done throughout history. Look at the state of the world even today. So yeah, it could sound like we're going back in history. No, but these things are still happening. Have you been to Africa? A lot of it, their hands are still very much on the continent. So please spare us the sermon and the rhetorics around dignity of Africa. You haven't respected our dignity. You're still not respecting it. The only reason you have issue with the AES is because they have kicked you out and are fighting for the sovereignty of Africa. And newsflash, in case you didn't know, this is exactly why the entire continent, people of African descent and beyond throughout the world are rallying behind them. This is why they have the support of the people. The people are not complaining. Why should you? Don't come teach us. Don't get me wrong. I'm for freedom of expression, assembly, etc. But you're the last people who should come talk to us about what dignity of our own people should look like.
Well put. Now I'll say a couple of things just to add to some context. I think, when I have these conversations with people who are in the West and they think this is like some kind of conspiracy theory around why people from the West are so engaged in Africa, right? And there's this idea of resources. What does that mean? And I'll be very specific, right? Because you mentioned it earlier, and I think it was really important. you mentioned the resources used to power the country of France and how they were able to get those resources for cheap. You have to understand, those who are watching, those who are new, you may not have heard us talk about this before, but there aren't a lot of mineral resource deposits in Europe. So the things used to build cars, to run your air conditioning, to light your house, and I don't just mean like the light bulb. I mean everything incorporated in the light bulb, the entire process of building a light bulb. Maybe the glass can be made in Europe, but every other piece of it comes from somewhere else. The industries that Europe exports and their businesses, many of the hard labor businesses that they have, require tools and machinery made from products coming out of the ground in Africa. Their entire supply chain comes from the continent, right? And so I think it's really important for people to understand that Europe does not exist as it does today without the deals that they've had, the favorable deals they've had with former African leaders to continue to be able to build economies that are being propped up by African resources at very low prices. And because those former African leaders were generating personal wealth, they were willing to sell these products at discounts and not take that income and pour it into the country so that they can personally make themselves wealthy. Those same people are the ones lobbying the French government, Cote d'Ivoire, and others to get the former leaders or themselves back in power in these said countries, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And so that's why when you hear the European Union talk about coups, they're really talking about the ability to go back to the deals they had in the past. Now, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have also blamed France and other members for the attacks that have happened on them, which is, been categorically denied by France themselves, of course. But it's been a constant part of the discussion. And so if we believe and agree that Burkina Faso has done their research to determine who's been involved in these attempted coups, etc., then we would understand why they would cut diplomatic ties with a country that is attempting to not only overthrow the leadership that the country wants, but also potentially unalive them as well, right? So it just makes sense that Burkina Faso would cut ties with France, considering what they have been saying as of recent as to who's been responsible for these attacks. I would not be surprised if Niger and Mali does as well. They've already removed troops from the countries. It seems like they're moving towards that direction. In general, what you see one of the three parts of the confederation do, the others do as well, because they're kind of forming one confederation under one, almost like a giant country. And it seems like they're likely to follow suit. Okay, so we will continue to follow this and see, what this means. Obviously the EU has made these demands. They have yet to decide what the consequences are going to be publicly. So we'll see what they end up deciding to say, what those are going to be. And we'll be following those, and we'll be following the responses from the leaders of the AES on this.
Just to add to that, I'm sorry. Yeah. And it's just ironic that you have countries like America courting the AES. So at the end of the day, y'all know what you're doing. If the people of Africa were not standing up as they've done, had this been back in the day, Joe, you know what would have happened? A lot of things would have happened, and the rest of the continent would have been quiet. But the people have refused. So yes to people power.
There it is, 100%. And so moving on to a more lighthearted discussion, a little bit of a palate cleanser before we move on to the rest of the stories. The World Cup. And yes, I have been criticized for my lack of knowledge of international football because I do not watch as much international football as I do of American-related sports, even though I lived on the continent for 4 years. Sue me. So anyway, but I will speak high level for this particular piece, and then I'll let Gloria speak to some more of the details. But one thing we will see from First Post Africa is that they're saying the old football hierarchy is officially gone. At the expanded 48-team 2026 FIFA World Cup, critics grumbled that increasing Africa's representation would dilute the competition. You might have heard maybe about 4 to 5 months ago, there were some pundits from Europe talking negatively about the African Cup of Nations and the Africa teams and the teams representing Africa in the World Cup. Excuse me, my voice is cracking. And they mentioned that will potentially dilute it. And in fact, there is lots of discussions about the earlier rounds diluting the actual game because you have teams that are not up to par. However, what's interesting is that the African teams have outperformed and overperformed what people thought they were going to do, and the teams actually diluting them are actually in parts of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, sorry, and other parts of the world. So with that, what has been said is instead, the continent completely rewrote history. Of the 10 African nations that arrived, an unprecedented 9 marched directly into the round of 32 knockout stage, securing a tournament high 90% success rate that completely outclassed Europe and South America. While South Africa bowed out after a loss 1-0 to Canada, the African charge continued afterwards. There are a number of games, some played yesterday, throughout the rest of this week, today, tomorrow, and Saturday. But we're going to play this video from the folks at First Post Africa, and then we'll have some more commentary on the other side.
Every 4 years, the FIFA World Cup asks a familiar question. Who truly owns the beautiful game? For decades, the football establishment gave a predictable answer, often looking at Africa with a patronizing pat on the back. They said, African teams have the talent, but do they have the discipline? Do they have the depth? Well, at the 2026 World Cup, Africa didn't just answer those questions. The continent completely tore up the script. Look at these scenes. This isn't just joy. It is a declaration. For the first time in history, FIFA expanded the tournament to 48 teams, giving Africa 10 slots. Critics grumbled. They warned it would dilute the quality of the competition. Former Italian football manager Gennaro Gattuso has even been on record saying Africa deserves fewer World Cup slots. It makes Europe's life harder. Well, he got the second part right. Africa is making everyone's life harder, but not by lowering the quality, by completely redefining it. Look at these numbers. Out of the 10 African nations that arrived, 9 marched directly into the round of 32 knockout stage. Only Tunisia lost. That is a 90% success rate, the absolute highest of any region in the world, beating out footballing powerhouses like South America and Europe. Now, the knockout phase is a ruthless win or go home environment. Just this weekend, South Africa fought valiantly, but ultimately fell to 1-0 in a heartbreaking battle against co-hosts Canada.
All right, so we will leave it there, but I will add one thing. Actually, you know what? I'll let you. What are your thoughts, and then I'll add my thoughts afterwards.
Yeah, yay, Africa. I mean, of course. Back in the day, Joe, like even I think as recently as the 90s, African countries dominated. If you were mentioning countries like or listing countries like Argentina, Portugal, you were listing African countries side by side as well. So we've never been in any position in history to dilute anything. Football, dare I say, we in our own right own that sport as well. Do you know what I mean? The issue has always been our leadership. unfortunately. And thankfully, we're proving the world wrong this time. We're not even talking about the players on the France team. I mean, have you seen the French team, the lineup of the players there? You can see Africa all over it. So we already have the talent. There's no question about that. It's just, and that's why, even with, in spite of the controversy surrounding Morocco and everything that's happened, or that happened with AFCON, what I would say is that I have observed that they have prioritized sports in a way that I haven't really seen any other country on the continent do. And this explains why, we're seeing the results now with them playing. So if we had leaders who actually understood the importance of sports and see, you think it's just a hobby and you overlook it and you underrate it, this is what happens. This is actually a great way to improve tourism to your nation, to let the world know more about your countries. This is a way to even generate income. It's not just about oil and diamonds or whatever resources we have. We also have the manpower. And I guess the takeaway here is the world can see that the talents are there. There's no question about it. But we just hope that our leaders would step up and allow us leverage off of these talents and take Africa to the top, because that's where we belong.
Agreed, 100%. And I think, to that point about, and that was the point I was going to make, is that a former Italian team member, I can't remember what his role was, who had made that statement. That was the statement I was referencing earlier. And the interesting thing is, many times, many Africans do not play for their home countries. They've begun to start playing for the countries in which the teams that they played for during their seasons in their professional career, they would play for those countries because they become citizens of those countries as well. They may be dual citizens and they play for those teams. And I think that has led to the increase in quality of some of these teams in Europe. If everyone who was a first generation African or zero generation African did not play for any of the European teams, I think there would be a lot of different outcomes from what those teams would look like in terms of how they would play. And I think there'd be different outcomes from on the African teams as well, if they actually played for their countries of origin. A lot of people have a lot of reasons for why they play for other countries outside of their country of origin. But even specifically, like I think about, the U.S. last year at the Olympics, and Joel Embiid not playing for Cameroon, but playing for the United States, for example, right? That happens frequently in different sports. And I guarantee you, now I'm not speaking about basketball because the U.S. is going to win no matter what, but in terms of some of these others, especially specifically football, where some people play their whole lives in hopes to get to a European team and play for La Liga or Champions League or whatever. And when they end up playing there, they end up playing for the country in which they become a citizen. If in fact they did not do that, I think we'd be in a very different position, and people would have a lot different things to say about the African teams and whether they have discipline or not. But I think the fact that they expanded it and allowed for people to have a chance to play showed that those who had a chance to play actually deserved to be on the world stage and actually performed much better than those who wanted to be gatekeepers initially anticipated. So as far as the schedule goes, I do want to give people the schedule of the World Cup if they want to support African teams. The schedule as of right now is as follows. Yeah. So today's schedule, as far as African teams playing, at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Algeria will be playing Switzerland. Let's see, and that is today. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. I guess we're still in the round of 32. Those are the key matchups that are going to be on television. Algeria is actually playing in British Columbia, Vancouver. I know that there were a bunch of games the last couple of days. Let me just double check to see if there are any other teams playing. I'm just looking for African teams. So I've seen a bunch of other games that are being played, like Spain and Austria are playing, Portugal and Croatia are playing you know, LA and Toronto respectively. I'm just trying to get the schedule rest of the week. Doing this in real time, guys. So the rest of the week we have that. Okay, so tomorrow Egypt is playing Austria at 2 p.m. Eastern. That'll be in Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. So Egypt is playing Australia, not Austria. Sorry, Egypt is playing Australia in Foxborough, Massachusetts, in the United States. As I mentioned, today at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is a very late game, in British Columbia, Vancouver, Algeria is playing Switzerland. Cabo Verde or Cape Verde is playing Argentina. That's going to be a tough game. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Stadium at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. That's going to be a tough one. Argentina is where Lionel Messi plays for. If I'm not mistaken, he also plays for a Miami team in the MLS in the United States. So it's almost going to be like a home game for him. So Cabo Verde, best of luck against Argentina and the GOAT. And Ghana is playing versus Colombia tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. Eastern at Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, California. So there are 4 games left for African teams today and tomorrow. Morocco already advanced to the round of 16. South Africa was eliminated, unfortunately. Ivory Coast was eliminated to Norway in a 2-1 loss. DR Congo was eliminated to England after a 2-1 loss to them. And unfortunately, last night, Senegal lost. As Jada is mentioning, they played a tough game to Belgium and lost 3-2. So they were knocked out. So the round of 16 chances are it's going to be a tough one. But as far as African teams that are able to advance to the round of 16, if they win their games, it'll be Algeria, Egypt, Cape Verde, or Ghana. So those are the 4 teams from Africa left in the tournament. So that is the World Cup. Up to you guys to decide to watch and support those teams. They'll be played on Fox and on NBC if you are in the United States. I don't know how else you can watch it otherwise, but you can do your Googles and find out how you can watch these games and the times that they're being played. All right. So moving on from the World Cup to Kenya and the unfinished uprising, how Gen Z still haunts the Ruto government. So according to First Post Africa, whose video we will be watching in just a moment, a solemn anniversary turned violent in Kenya as thousands of young demonstrators took to the streets to mark 2 years since the historic youth-led Gen Z protests. Despite government assurances of public safety, Nairobi's central business district was transformed into a heavily fortified no-go zone. Riot police deployed tear gas, water cannons, and miles of razor wire to block activists and opposition leaders from marching to the parliament building. Over 350 people were arrested nationwide, and with the interior minister branding them as quote unquote criminals, while rights groups alleged peaceful citizens were unlawfully swept up. The unrest highlights the enduring anger over the deadly June 25th, 2024 crackdown, which led to over 60 people who lost their lives. So as victims' families reject the non-transparent, quote unquote, $15 million compensation fund and demand police accountability, President William Ruto faces an escalating political crisis just ahead of next year's high-stakes general election. So we're going to play a video from First Post Africa, and then we will have some commentary on the other side.
We begin today in Kenya. A solemn anniversary has turned violent once again. On June 25th, thousands of Kenyans marked the second anniversary of deadly Gen Z protests. Despite the government's promise that it would be a normal day for the people, the day of remembrance quickly shattered into fresh unrest. Police clashed with young demonstrators. Officers fired tear gas and set up armed roadblocks to disperse the crowds. The streets turned into a battleground. Even gunshots were reportedly heard. Take a look. Well, the government has confirmed that more than 350 people have been arrested across the country. Now, the chaos erupted as ordinary Kenyans, activists and opposition leaders tried to march to the Parliament building. Riot police mounted miles of razor wire and deployed water cannons outside the building's gates.
So we're here today to remember the Gen Z martyrs who were murdered during the Gen Z protests of 2024, 2025, and also 2026. And we are saying that the government should not hoodwink the public with compensation. We want justice.
What you are seeing on the screen is a city at standstill. Nairobi's central business district was turned into a virtual no-go zone. Shops, restaurants and schools were completely shut down. And as the situation escalated, Interior Minister Kipchumba Murkomen defended the heavy-handed response. He labelled those arrested as criminals and argued that the lockdown was entirely necessary to protect businesses and prevent widespread looting.
To prevent widespread looting, okay. Gloria, your thoughts on the shutdown of this protest and the trying to shut down the dissent of those who are unhappy with today's government in Kenya?
And this is in no way to justify any sort of looting that could occur, but that is actually a side effect or a byproduct of bad governance. Yeah. So when you have what looks like anarchy, or when you have leaders who do not listen to the people, these are the things that could happen. You would have protests, and no matter how peaceful a protest is, it could result in it could end in things like these. But that does not in any way demonize the protest itself. It does not take away from what people who are protesting are simply asking for. In this case, the Kenyan Gen Zs are asking for justice. And I have a big, very important question to ask. Where is the European Union? Where is the EU? You're talking about people clamping down on people's freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. And here you have people peacefully protesting, and over 350 people have been arrested, but the EU is silent, but has a lot of voice and a lot of outrage and a lot of opinions when it comes to the Sahel, for instance. This is exactly what we're talking about. It's selective. When your people are in power, you're good. So this is a clear example of what I was talking about earlier. But every time I see the Kenyan Gen Zs, I get goosebumps. Every time I see them rallying, every time I see them in the streets, I've never seen anything like this. Not in this generation of ours. You know, we've heard of these, you know, like with the Soweto uprising and things like that. But the ability to continue, and this is why when you see what happened in Nepal, when you see what happened in Madagascar, I think first of Kenyan Gen Zs, the fact that they've set such a tone or a pace that is actually, and it's not that it's supposed to be so difficult to follow, but what a beautiful template, just the resilience from these people. Every single year, they remember what happened in 2024. So those people who lost their lives didn't lose their lives in vain, because they have such a resilient group of people who continually remind the world that this was done to them and they still haven't gotten justice.
Yeah, 100% I agree. And I think movements like this tend to die out and to go by the wayside because people give up. You know, many people give up. I mean, it happened in the United States at one point. It seems like it's happened even for many people in Nigeria after the SARS movement, right? And so to see the resilience, as you mentioned, I think is really, really important to call out, because it is difficult to continue to go out there and to continue to be met with the violence they're met with. But they have not given up. They continue to move forward. And those who have lost their lives did not lose their lives in vain, because the movement goes on. I do hope that this encourages other people to run for office. And so eventually, as time goes on in the next generations, you'll see people who care more about the people and making decisions that have a better impact on the people of the country moving forward. So we will see how this continues to play out, and we'll continue to keep you guys posted on these things. And I will remind everybody once again that Kenya has decided who the real folks to protest against are, unlike our friends in the south of the continent. But before we get to that conversation, I do want to talk about what's happening in Tanzania before we get to the South Africa discussion. Because there is one more story we want to talk about, and it's about crushing political dissent, something we've spoken about before. We've talked about the crushing of political dissent. We've talked about leaders who stay in power, etc. I do think it's important to cover the fact that Tanzania is facing mounting criticism after the government banned all political rallies ahead of the planned nationwide protest on July 7th. Opposition leaders and rights activists have condemned the move as an attack on democratic freedoms, accusing the president and her administration of using security concerns to suppress dissent. So the government says the restrictions that they're putting in place are quote unquote necessary to prevent violence. They're citing that it's they're having alleged security threats and arrest of individuals carrying weapons. So there's a ban obviously in country. We're gonna watch this video from African Post, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Let's shift our focus now to Tanzania. The country's government is facing growing backlash over its decision to ban all political rallies. Tanzanian activists and opposition leaders have criticized the decision. They labeled it as growing repression of Samia Suluhu Hassan's government. The opposition Chadema party called the ban unconstitutional. Its head of foreign affairs, John Kitoka, has said that the government feared growing public demand for freedom, which is why it is responding with intimidation and repression. Now, the ban came ahead of planned protests on the 7th of July against last year's contested election. Hassan secured another term in the October 2025 election after the two main opposition presidential candidates were barred from contesting. Western diplomats and rights groups even accused the Hassan government of abductions and murders of critics. The Tanzanian government is using these planned protests as an excuse to curb dissent. It has cited security concerns to justify its curbs. The government has said that it has identified security threats and has allegedly found individuals in possession of weapons planning criminal acts.
I don't think we need to hear from the government. You got the idea. Your thoughts on what is happening in Tanzania or Tanzania?
You know, I remember what happened in, was it December of last year? When people were speaking up or at some point became very afraid to speak. And we used our platform and called for justice for the people of Tanzania who had been, or who had lost their lives, even though the government denied a lot of the allegations. I mean, we saw a lot of things on camera that were actually chilling and horrifying. And it's so, you know, I did notice, you know, there was supposed to be a peaceful protest sometime that, was it D12? They called it, or D11, I can't remember, or D10 or something. It was some day in December. And that didn't happen because the government shut down the protest. Again, where is the EU when you need the EU to speak up? This is actually a clear example of where freedom of speech and assembly are being threatened. And that protest that was planned in December never happened. And, you know, I was following up on the story. I was going to come out and speak on it, but I was like, you know what? Because there were a lot of attacks, even tons of attacks. I mean, it was really intense, really, really scary intense. But to think that Tanzania is still here is just really unfortunate. But this has been, sadly, the rhetoric, even though the supporters are going to absolutely deny what we're saying, but this has been the pattern for years with this government. And yeah, hopefully at some point the people of Tanzania will be allowed to express themselves freely.
Yes, 100%. You know, it is unfortunate because, you know, if I remember correctly, the party has been in power for a very long time, and it's a new face to the party. You know, there was a lot of hope, I think, because she was a woman and she was just she seemed like a different face. But that's what one of the things that I've seen a headline recently say, different face, same party, or something to that effect. You know, gender and race don't always mean these are the people that are right for leadership. So I do make sure that I call those things out. Look, it's really unfortunate to see what is happening there. I have visited Tanzania, and I remember being there, and Hassan had just entered presidency. She had taken over because the previous president had perished. Many think due to COVID. In the country, they said not so much. And she kind of took over as interim president. And I remember asking people what they thought about her and what they thought about it. And the tour guide was very scared to speak about how he thought, even to a bunch of foreigners who were in a bus on the way to the Serengeti. He was like, we don't talk about politics. I was like, oh, all right, okay. So, but this helps me understand why when you're seeing what's happening today. So, you know, obviously, you know, it's tough because there's really not much we can say until, you know, there's a change. We can anticipate this will continue to happen. So good luck to those who plan to protest on the 7th of July. We will be following what happens and give you guys the updates as we get them. All right, moving on to South Africa, where there has been lots of talk. There was a June 30th deadline for all illegal immigrants, as was put by those who posed this to leave the country of South Africa. So there's a number of videos and stories we want to play. There was some anti-immigrant protests and march on the 30th. There was a meeting by Ramaphosa, the president, with leaders from the Zulu tribe, not Zulu tribe leaders, to be very clear, right? They're march leaders from the Zulu tribe, but not Zulu tribe leaders. Because if I heard the king of the Zulu nation himself, he actually opposed these specific protests. And so these were folks that happened to be from the Zulu tribe of Zulu descent, who are leaders of these marches, but not leaders of the Zulu tribe. I do want to make that distinction. But first, let's get to the anti-immigrant groups upset at Ramaphosa's conversation that we covered last week when we talked about Ramaphosa actually saying that we shouldn't focus on these anti-immigrant anti-immigrant rhetoric, I think is the way he described it. And so we will play this video from First Post, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
One of Africa's leading economies is standing on a razor's edge. A tense, highly charged and unofficial deadline is looming. Anti-immigration groups have issued a stark ultimatum. They want all undocumented foreign nationals out of South Africa by June the 30th. They have threatened a massive national shutdown if their demands are not met. As anxiety peaks, the anti-migrant groups are pushing back against accusations of xenophobia, directly slamming the government for creating a crisis. Leading the charge is the March and March movement. Its leadership argues that local communities have been abandoned by the state, forcing citizens to take matters into their own hands.
Local communities have been abandoned by the state, but they're looking at the wrong people as the issue for that. Now, there are a couple of different videos, so instead of playing that entire video, let me play some footage from the protest on the 30th of June. So this was fresh footage from that day. So I'm going to play a little bit of this for you. And then there's some other videos that we should probably play before we give our commentary, because there's so many different things that happened on and around the 30th that we want to cover all of it. But let's play some footage from each of them, and then we'll have some commentary afterwards.
Anti-immigrant protesters in South Africa took to the streets on Tuesday, the unofficial deadline set by citizen-led groups for undocumented foreigners to leave the country. In the economic capital, Johannesburg, most shops remained closed and police were deployed to head off unrest and looting. Growing anti-immigrant violence over recent weeks has left 4 people dead. Several African governments have organized planes or buses to repatriate their citizens. In Durban, protesters in Zulu attire carrying sticks and shields chanted "Abahambe," which means "let them go." As the continent's biggest economy, South Africa is a magnet for migrant labor.
All right, and real quick, I want to get to this Larry Ludlow Larry Madawo from CNN. He was there at the protest, and he was speaking to South African protesters on the deadline day for "quote unquote" illegal foreigners to leave. So let's get to some of his footage and see how those conversations went.
I'm sorry, Madawo. Even I got it wrong.
Madawo, yeah, okay.
By anti-migrant groups for all undocumented migrants, mostly Africans, to leave South Africa. Let me speak to one of the people who's marching here, Palesa. Why are you out on the streets today, Palesa?
Because we are tired. We as South Africans, we are tired of being given drugs. Our kids,
right,
are given drugs. And our husbands, our mothers, they are on drugs because of illegal.
There's no evidence of the drugs, but you're married to a foreigner. You're married to a Congolese, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And he is documented.
Yes.
And we met when we were 19 years old.
Right.
Think about it. He was not having a mind of drugs or whatsoever.
Right.
All right.
Okay, and you are. A lot of people say this march is xenophobic. Do you agree?
I don't agree. We are not xenophobic. We're only xenophobic when people say to us, we must not march. We are not xenophobic. We are loving people.
Right.
We love people. We love foreigners, but we want the foreigners to be documented.
Right. Paleta, thank you. She says they love foreigners, but they want the foreigners to be documented. So the march is underway here. It's just a few dozen people right now, but there might be more in future. It's still early in the morning. Police have said that they will keep everybody safe. They have a right to march, but not to violence or intimidation. But they essentially have shut down the city of Johannesburg. We're in downtown Johannesburg, and it's been stunning just how completely deserted the city is because of the fear of this deadline set by these groups and the possibility that there might be some violence, even though authorities in South Africa have been telling everybody, you'll be safe, today will be a normal working day, but that's not the reality. What you see here with people already, it's just after 10 a.m. and already people on the streets declaring that South African immigration law must be respected and any undocumented migrants should leave. And you've seen a lot of African countries already repatriating the citizens from South Africa. Zimbabwe, Ghana, Malawi, Uganda, Nigeria have all said they will be repatriating the citizens from this country, Polo.
All right, I'll pause it there because that's a lot of videos back to back. I'll play the other two afterwards. But your thoughts on the protest and her statement? It kind of reminds me of somebody here in the United States who married a foreigner but is trying to stop foreigners from coming to the country. And it's very interesting to see people who do that. But anyway, two foreigners, actually married two foreigners and a grandparent who was an immigrant. But anyway, your thoughts, actually one parent and one grandparent on the other side that are foreigners. Anyway, your thoughts on what Larry, who interviewed this young lady who was married to a foreign national, and the protests in general and the rhetoric before we move on to some of the other videos in South Africa.
So lots of irony and contradiction. And in the same video where Larry was interviewing that lady, she talked about how they are the ones who bring drugs to the country and all that. And then ironically, you're married to a foreigner and you're like, yeah, but he doesn't have the mind to do such. So the point, and this is why I say it's a contradiction, the point you've just made is that it's not all foreigners who do that. And we've seen this in all our comments. We've explained it to a point of exhaustion, how we're not, by no means or in no way are we endorsing illegal immigration. In no way are we endorsing people going to your country to do criminal activities. I say get them, lock them up, deport them, do what you have to do. And this is why we keep saying it's the way it's the channels through which you're doing this that's had people really globally raising eyebrows. So it's not a thing of, so because the first question is always, so you want us to harbor undocumented migrants? Nobody's asking you to do that. In my own way, long before we even got to this point that seems like a boiling point, I have even experienced it. And I say this with all the love I can muster, because it will never be personal for me, no matter how many attacks I get over this conversation. Even I have experienced it. I have shared history about South Africa innocently, nothing to do with what we're even talking about today. And I have felt the rejection. I'm not an undocumented migrant in South Africa, but some have actually given me heat. And even from the beginning of when I started on my storytelling journey, the point I'm making is, at the end of the day, there's this mentality that all Black foreigners, that's what it looks like anyway, all Black foreigners are a certain way. This is why the words like xenophobia and Afrophobia have been used. So if you could understand the optics and understand where people are coming from, but it just feels like no matter what we say, your minds are made up. And this is why I commend those who have done what they can or what they could to leave. I know Malawi, I think at some point they were waiting on the government to come rescue them. I hope they get to that if they haven't already. Nigeria, Ghana, and anyone else who, documented, undocumented, and maybe documented if you can. Because right now it just seems like it's really toxic. Thankfully, it didn't get out of hand like people were afraid it would. But it doesn't mean that tension is still not there. So do what you have to do. Just be safe.
Absolutely. And we'll get to the 25,000 foreigners who've already left South Africa and some of the other, there's another video there on that. And then we have Ramaphosa meeting with some of the leaders or some of the Zulu folks. I will say really quickly, Jada asked this question. Did you watch Jacinda's interview with the Nigerian lady? So what she is referring to is this interview here with Nigeria Info FM on borderlines. Is it Ireti Youssef challenges South African author and activist Jacinta after revealing she had interviewed documented Nigerians who say they are leaving South Africa because they no longer feel safe. What follows is a tense debate about documentation, migration, public perception, and government responsibility. She has been referenced a few times, Jacinta, so maybe we can give a second or two so you can hear a little bit about how Jacinta talks about these things when in front of someone who confronts her about the specifics. However, this is a little bit different from how she communicates when she's in front of groups of South Africans only or on South African news outlets. But so you guys, because I've referenced Jacinta on many occasions, we haven't played any videos from her. So let's play a little bit from this interview that Jada is talking about. And then we will move on to some of the others, just to give you guys an idea of how she communicates, what she communicates, so you understand where she's been coming from.
Those who want to go, those people that have said, we've come here because we want to leave before the 30th. Yes. Because obviously people are petrified, they're afraid, and nobody knows what's going to happen. We'll talk about that later. I interviewed documented migrants yesterday, right? From where? From Nigeria. I have them, I interviewed them, and they said they're documented, but they want to go because one, they're afraid. There was a man who had been here for 30 years, okay? He said, I've seen this happen many times, okay? I've seen the violence, but this one is different. He said, I go into a shop and I'm attacked. I go into this and this. His wife is there, his child is there. He said, yes, I'm documented. I've been here for 30 years. I had a business. So what I'm saying to you is, permit me, it's not just those who are undocumented
So you see,
who want to leave.
That's why I want to talk to you.
I know.
That's why I wanted you to tell me.
Yeah, I'm going there.
I want you to tell me when you say they're documented. I want to go into what you say.
So
what
it's not
exactly
just those.
do you mean they're documented?
Well, they say they have their papers.
You don't know that, right?
Well, I'm just saying, but neither do you. You don't know the papers for all those people.
See, that's why I want you and I to be to try and understand each other here, right? Because I'm living here, and I can grab the next South African when we come out of here, right? And ask them from the interviews that we have seen of Nigerians once they land in South Africa, how many of them do you believe are telling the truth?
So what? Nigerians are liars because that's your experience?
Not just Nigerians, no, not just Nigerians. All the people once they leave South Africa.
Once they leave?
Yeah.
So I think it was important to play a little bit from this interview, because what you had seen in these viral videos that Jacinta is talking about is when they approach someone, they say to the person, show us your papers. Kind of reminds me of Nazi Germany, but show us your papers. Show us that you're a citizen of this country. And people are like, well, I'm not walking around with my papers, but I'm a citizen. I've had this business for 25 years. I employ South Africans. I can't have this business if I'm not a citizen. And they say, well, we don't believe you. If you don't have your papers, we don't believe you. And so what she's saying is, what kind of papers do they have? That, by taking that approach, that gives her the permission to be able to talk about all immigrants as undocumented and just say that they all have fake papers or that they're lying, so she can approach the way she has been. Not just her, some of the other folks who do this, because I mean, she's just one person. There are many other people who are stopping people on the street, who are pulling people out of shops, forcing them to shut their shops down, and communicating with them that they don't believe them. And I've heard the question from many of them, are you police? It would be the question I've heard some of these shop owners ask. And those people are like, no, we're not police, but are you a citizen? So I do think that there is a lot here to unpack, and we don't have the time to do it. But I did want you guys to kind of hear how Jacinta talks about these things. She defends it by utilizing these sweeping statements. They're basically like, they're lying. These people, do you believe them? The thing is, when you walk up to someone and you say they're not a citizen, especially if you're not a political official, or you're not a law official, you have to prove that they're not a citizen. They don't have to prove that they are a citizen. And I think that's where there's this this very strange approach to doing it. I think if they maybe went to a shop, they had done some research and realized that that shop owner had been there illegally, harboring illegal citizens or something to that effect, or illegal individuals or undocumented individuals, I could see potentially them confronting that individual and communicating that. Even those instances, obviously, I think that's up to the officials to handle. But if that's something they decided to do, it makes more sense. But to just walk up to random people and basically tell them that they're lying with no evidence to the contrary, I think is a big part of this issue. And it speaks to the fact that they're focused on the wrong issues, right? The only thing that they can do is walk up to these individuals. They won't go protest at the Capitol, won't go protest the government officials. They will walk up to individuals and ask them for their papers. I don't know, any thoughts on, I don't know if you saw this interview or Jacinta and what she's been saying, before I play two more videos before we move on.
I need to watch that interview. Thank you so much, Jada, for that. But I've also heard the same Jacinta mention, let's even forget Nigeria for now and talk about Zimbabwe. She mentioned names like Nadia Nakai, Peter Ondoro. She mentioned celebrities from Zimbabwe who have Zimbabwean heritage, who live in South Africa. And she said, why are they even here? Why can't they go to Zimbabwe and start their TV stations and do whatever, or present in their countries? Why? Those are they not documented? This is what we're saying, Jacinta. This is what we're saying to those who have, it's that blanket approach. And now you've basically even suggested that you don't believe in Nigerian if they tell you they're documented. So now that negative stereotype is out there, and it's not in any way helped anyone, not even those who are protesting for foreigners to leave. So that's sweeping, those generalizing, those sweeping statements are basically what everybody's calling out. But y'all don't want to see it, so.
Right, absolutely. A couple really quick things that we want to get to, because I know we're over time a bit. But the link to this, unfortunately, I don't have it. But if you just the title of the video is called, let me just give you guys the title. So if after this live stream you want to go check out this interview, because it is one of the few interviews you have with somebody pushing back on Jacinta and talking to her directly about the specifics. It is called Afrophobia. Ireti challenges Jacinta claims about Nigerians in South Africa. So it's interesting because this particular video only has 8,000 views. That's from 5 days ago. But this is one of those interviews where you get a chance to hear from one of the loudest voices in South Africa in this movement against immigration in general, not just undocumented and illegal immigration, but I think in general. And you know, two things can be true. One of the things she talks about is how many African countries need to do a better job of for their people. But I think what she's neglecting to talk about is South Africa also needs to do a better job for its, you know, disenfranchised as well. You know, the thing is that one thing you do know is that some countries are better with certain levels of capitalism than others. And so some people go there for those opportunities. And while doing so, they may have more advancement than some of the locals. That happens in many economies. So in any case, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I do want to mention and get to this next video about the 25,000 foreigners who have fled South Africa as unofficial deadline to leave had expired. So this is from Africa News. So we'll play a little bit of this video, and then lastly, we'll get to the video of President Ramaphosa meeting with some of those Zulu folks or people who identify as Zulu. And these are some of the protesters that we have heard and seen from. But let's play a little bit from the folks who've talked about the 25,000 foreigners who have fled South Africa.
Can we play them back to back?
Yes, play them back to back.
Okay. Across South African cities, police forces deployed to curb unrest and protests on Tuesday. They responded to violent anti-immigration sentiment. Citizen-led groups imposed an unofficial deadline on Tuesday for undocumented migrants to leave the country. Many immigrant workers have taken refuge in cities like Cape Town and Johannesburg in search for help to leave. At least 4 people were killed in anti-immigration violence in the past weeks. In response to the situation, several African governments organized repatriation and evacuation schemes to protect their citizens. 25,000 people were repatriated to their home countries in recent weeks, according to South Africa's Border Management Authority.
It's quite a substantial number of folks. Now, you see a famous face there. This gentleman's name always escapes me, but I will play a quick video from him meeting with Ramaphosa and a few others just ahead of the June 30th protest. Is there no audio from Business Insider Africa? Let me see if I refresh it. Will there be some audio? Sorry, guys. I thought there was some audio from this.
Oh.
No audio. Okay, but anyway, you can see the footage of them meeting.
And people have been like, wow, are you all working together? I'm not suggesting that that's the case, but those have been some of the comments because people are like, because of they're smiling, they're happy. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe he was able to reason with them. I don't know. Yeah.
So that video there was another video that had audio, but Business Insider Sub-Saharan Africa did not on that one. But you kind of get the idea. There was a meeting. Apparently, the discussions were around keeping the protests nonviolent, etc. That was what I understand that conversation to have been around. But your thoughts on, and by the way, just on the Jacinta interview, Jada is saying, be prepared to be swayed because she sounds so reasonable and practical. Yet if you live in the West, it'll give you deja vu. There are some people who can sound practical, even though, because the thing is, two things can be true. You can make a true statement and then also follow it up with a solution that is incorrect, right? There are many folks who do that. I'm not going to name names in the US, but you can pick some women of color who have worked for Fox News and Breitbart previously, maybe. Just pick people who have been out there who can speak to a problem in a country and have a solution that I don't think makes any sense. I don't think many of us would agree that they make sense, but just because you can call out a problem doesn't mean that your solution is the right one. And I think that's one of the things that you can find with Jacinta. She can speak to a problem, but she has incorrect solutions, and also many times incorrect sources for those problems. So you can call out a problem, but be wrong for what led to that problem, and also be wrong for what solves that problem. Sorry about that. Your thoughts on both of those videos and the instances that we're talking about here?
Yeah, just in the interest of time, I think I have spoken to even the videos you've played. Yeah, it's just a really interesting time to be alive, and I don't mean that in a good way.
Absolutely. So with that, I will say we will continue to follow the situation in South Africa. Obviously, the deadline was supposed to be June 30th. That was just a couple of days ago. There was an anti-immigrant protest, as you saw. There's been some conversations. 25,000 people have already left. That is a substantial number. We will see if there continue to be more and what that does to the local economy for those who are impacted, because all the people who are complaining are the ones that are most impacted. Those who they should be protesting will not even notice any of this change unless they have undocumented migrants working for them in their households, etc. Other than that, they won't feel the change. So the people who you should have issues with won't even know that it happened. Okay, so with that, that concludes today's live stream. I want to thank you all for joining. We see a bunch of people joining at the last minute. Go back and watch this from the beginning. Give us your thoughts and your opinions in the comments as this replays. And if you have any questions and or suggestions for next week's stories, please put them in the comments below. Make sure you follow Gloria at The Gloria AO and at Diaspora Station. Follow Authentic African at Authentic African across all platforms. Any variation or version of that name that you see on the screen there. And join us next week for another This Week in Africa. Thanks for watching. See you guys all on the next video. Bye, guys.